Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our long awaited review of Tears of the Nameless. This is a book that came out back in September from George Mann. Make sure you like the video if you haven't subscribed to the channel for more High Republic content just like this. Comment below, let us know your thoughts on this book. Most of you have probably read it by now since this review is a few months late. So let's start off, as always, like we do, with a review of the plot and the story structure, as well as the writing, the way George Mann constructed the story, the way it was paced, all of those good things that make up the story of Tears of the Nameless. I'm going to pass it over to you first, Sonic. What did you think overall?
I think it was essential. After Temptation of the Force, as much as I enjoyed that book, that very much was like a romance novel with some important plot developments. I guess you could say this is a little bit more like a Path of Deceit in the sense that this is very impactful for the events of the narrative and for the characters that have been established. It's really pushed us towards the first real glance at the end game. And I think I really do appreciate that because for a while there, I think even something like Eye of Darkness, as much as I like it, I can also see that it's fairly bare bones in some areas. And this is the first book in a while that feels like we're really trying to pack the meat on the bones and have something for us to chew on and to really consider about all these little tiny developments and all these little strings that are being attached between characters, between events, between all the different forces of the High Republic. So, but this was fun because you got some of that into the dark sort of structure where the narrative is kind of flowing through and around him. But this time we got to really lean on that archaeological, librarian kind of like mindset that he has about history, about what he can learn from knowledge, from scriptures, and how he can apply that as best he can as that type of Jedi. And, we've talked about it from our very early phase one reviews. His story always feels like someone who's drawn into the field of action, even though he's someone who's more of a scholarly fellow. In that sense, he's kind of like an Obi-Wan for the High Republic era. Just so happens to be that he has even more of an inclination for following up with inanimate objects and records and history than actual people. And that is kind of what his arc has been, to learn how to balance that. How do you learn from other people, but how do you learn to connect that with all of the pieces of information that are, you're at your disposal, that people are asking you to kind of put together. So yeah, this is a really great story. You bring in this perspective of like some more of the upstart Jedi, the Jedi who haven't necessarily faced the same weight and destruction from the very beginning days of phase one. It's pretty clear that this story is not trying to be going easy on them, right? If anything, it's using it as a kind of a false hope dangled in your face that like these characters will be able to handle it differently. These characters will be able to deal with the devastation and destruction that the Nile have unleashed with the occlusion zone, with the Nameless, and then now the blight that's affecting everything in the galaxy. And this book doesn't hold back any of its punches. There's some very gut wrenching things happening with a lot of characters. Some you meet for the first time, some that you like really develop, and then they're just gone. So there's a very interesting plot line, I'd say, also with Coruscant, and it's very much tied to Phase Two characters, but also just like the entire concept of the Jedi Temple, what it's built over. Yeah, this is the first time they've like really tried to take a real stab at how the Jedi Temple is built over a Sith Shrine, which is built over Virgins, and kind of going over these little concepts and details that have been sprinkled in other media like the Acolyte, but now really chewing on it here and being much more successful in my mind. It got me where I wanted to be, and it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways. It was fascinating with some of the discoveries. This, yeah, this is an essential read by far for Phase 3.
Completely agree. This is not only an essential read, but I think this is the best Star Wars book of 2024. This was very, very, very good in so many different ways, from character to plot to structure. Everything about it worked. I didn't feel like it was overstuffed. A lot of Phase 3 stuff has felt overstuffed, including a lot of plot lines from a lot of different material. We have the releases of Phase 3 material so spread out from each other. It's like they have to give you recaps every single story about all the different things that have come in the past. Really well plotted, really well structured, and I was into the story, within the first 5 or 6 chapters, as opposed to the previous effort in young adult, which was Defy the Storm, which took me almost half the book to really get into because it felt so redundant. There are some major plot points in here. We finally get some real push on the Blight and the Nameless, and there are some answers here. Maybe not as many as you would hope for, but there are plenty of answers here and a plenty of story to keep you going. There's also just such rewarding narrative around so many different characters at this point, whether it be Reith and Comac or the new character Amadeo Azazo. He was a great addition to this story, and I really found him one of my favorite parts. And I wasn't quite sure off the bat, because when you're introducing new characters amongst all these characters, we've gotten so used to the young adult format being one that's just constantly introducing new people and really sacrificing the development of the old people in order to do that. Where Reith has really become a side character or kind of a comedic relief character at times, not necessarily because he's funny, but because he's awkward. Now we're finally embracing him. And I felt like that was something I waited a long time for. And it certainly paid off, because he has a storyline here that now is essential to the ultimate conclusion with the Nameless and with the Blight. And I think if you haven't read this book and you haven't read Into the Dark, you seem like you'll be missing a good chunk of what is at the heart of the young adult part of phase 1 and phase 3. And with Claudia Gray writing the final book in phase 3, I would only imagine Reith plays an even bigger role. This is an expansive story. This is what we have come to know and love from the High Republic. And it really is back here in so many ways. And I really appreciated what George Mann did here to recenter everything around the young adult universe, recenter a lot of things that have been in some of the comics, especially the Dark Horse and previously IDW comics, and bring a bunch of stuff in to really solidify this younger generation of characters who have grown up over the last 3 years we've been reading these characters. And here you feel a real strong change across the narrative for these characters. They do feel like they've aged. They do feel like they've had some weight. And even though we haven't necessarily seen all the stories around them, George Mann does a good job of making us feel like we've lived this battle through them for a long time. And I thought he did an admirable job of picking up that story and running with it, and ultimately giving us something that really, for the first time ever in the young adult side of phase 1 and phase 3, feels like it's truly important to the overall narrative. And I really appreciated that. Let's get into the characters, because, like I said, there are so many characters in this book, but it does really come back down to Comac and Reith. And last time we see them together, Comac leaves the Jedi Order and leaves Reith behind, who was his Padawan. And Reith, becomes a Jedi Knight, but he hasn't been able to really separate himself from the fact that not only did he lose a master originally, but he now lost the master who he was adopted by, basically, who kind of lost faith in the order. That has really struck Reith, and he's struggling with that throughout the beginning of the book. And it is their relationship that really is the heart of this book. But like you mentioned, so many other great characters, from villains like Sicarus to supporting Jedi like Amadeo. Sonic, when you looked at the characters in this book, who stood out to you, and who were some of your favorites throughout the story?
I mean, it's almost that triangle that you have there, especially for that first half of the book between Reed and then what you have there with Aslan, and then the absence of Comac, and like what Reed is kind of putting in place of Comac, what he's hearing from Aslan about his approval, about the work that he's been doing, the directions that he's nudging him towards, and then the questions that he's kind of been brewing in his mind about Comac, while Comac hasn't really quit in the same way that he kind of implies to in Mission to Disaster. Just he kind of just quits the order as a concept. He doesn't quit being a servant of the Force. Truly, it is for throughout the book that push and pull between what Reith is trying to get from Aslan in terms of information, in terms of approval, direction, and then what Aslan's kind of just doing as like a bit of a Pandora's box. You never know what's going to be in there. He was fascinating to read, and especially having seen his visuals already through the manga, through the comics, it makes every scene that he's in a lot stronger for me. I would say Amadeo was pretty surprising, because him and Master Locks, I didn't expect much out of them, because they've had some appearances here and there, but they're mostly like the super positive Jedi. And Here you get to see like just how much of the positivity is because of they just genuinely enjoy each other's company and they care about each other. It was nice. It was a good contrast. I loved seeing their dynamic between Reed and Amadeo, but I did like seeing how sometimes they would disconnect and go on their own way and then try to think about like what the other would do. What are we impressing upon each other? What are we really striving for? I think Sycaris is probably the best children of the Nile, the child of the Nile. This is the first time you really are like drenched in like what that means. And he's got some great, great stuff. Everyone here is just fun to read. And like I said about Comac, his flashback stuff, just like it was in Into the Dark, it reveals so much about him and how he approaches everything here. But this time, he's someone, despite having made such a strong choice before, he is still able to take that step forward, take that leap forward, because he knows that's what's right for the Jedi, what's right for the galaxy, and ultimately what's right for him and Reeth. And that ending scene with him and Reed, it's great closure. So George Mann, once again, he's carrying Phase 3 of the High Republic, especially with these characters.
Absolutely agree. And I agree about Comac and Reef. I mean, Reef here feels the most real he's ever felt, in my opinion. He is the bookish kid throughout the entirety of Phase 1, and he's really embracing his unique role in the High Republic. And in the High Republic, we've had the Jedi be far more individualized than they are later on when they are in the prequel era. And they all embrace their own talents and abilities, and you see his introverted tendencies and his bookish talents in a way really come into a practical use here. You see all of the things that make Reef actually play into a full-blown mission, a mission he fully believes in wholeheartedly and he goes for. And I like that growth in the character, and Comac's work playing off of him being in kind of a way the inverse. He's a master searching for a purpose. He's looking for a reason to keep going. He's looking for what's next for him, trying to find what's right for him, while also dealing with the relationships of his past bogging him down because he feels guilty about the way he's handled certain situations, while also dealing with the traumas he's had to deal with the death of Orla. And I found the relationship and the character examination of those two characters pretty fascinating in this story and really top tier amongst High Republic stories. There is some great examination of these characters, and Aslan is the other big standout. He absolutely steals almost every scene he's in, and I can't wait to see where his ultimate story ends. And Amadeo, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't think adding another kind of fairly new Jedi to this story would be a good idea, especially when we're going back to finally getting some Wreath stuff. But I thought he worked great in all the roles he played when he's playing off of Aslan, when he's playing off of Wreath, when he's playing off of his master. All of it is so good, and he's such a welcome addition to the story. And I can't wait to see Amadeo be more a part of the rest of what Claudia Gray has for store in this young adult universe. And then Sycaris. Sycaris is one of the best standout kind of new villains we've had, at least when it comes to the non-Markion Ro. He's both terrifying, compelling, and just really interesting. Every time we get him on the page, you're kind of wondering what he's going to do next. A really strongly written wild card villain, and I liked that character quite a bit. So let's give a final score out of 5. Sanak, what would you rate Tears of the Nameless out of 5?
I mean, I have to give my full applause, congratulations to George Mann. Every time he's stepped up to bat for a High Republic book, he's knocked it out of the park, and this might be his best one yet. Like we said, it's a very exciting book. It's a tragic book at times. There's a lot of joyous moments. There's some almost like Jedi Fallen Order inspired stuff in here. There's everything for everyone. Full credit there. This is a really, really strong book. So I'd have to give this a 4.25 out of 5.
Top to bottom, from characters to plot, this is a strong story. One of the most complete High Republic books we've gotten in a long time, where it has really interesting, exciting plot details that push the narrative forward while also giving us a lot of reward for dealing with these characters for so long. Certainly worth your time. And if you haven't yet checked out Tears of the Nameless, if you've been holding off for some reason because you haven't been interested in Phase 3, you should certainly give this a try. But I would also give it a 4.25 out of 5. It's a really strong book in every way, and I really am stretching to think of things that I didn't really love about this book. I'd say maybe the third act ends a little bit abruptly. If you are into the High Republic, this is certainly a massively rewarding book. So what are your guys' thoughts on Tears of the Nameless? Let us know in the comments below. If you've read it, did you agree with us? Did you disagree with us? Let us know down below. If you haven't liked the video yet, make sure you do so. Subscribe for the rest of the High Republic Phase 3 content. We'll be reviewing everything as we get to the final 2 books in the initiative next year, as well as the rest of the comics, and eventually doing a ranking and another guide. There's a lot of Phase 3 content coming, so make sure you subscribe for all of that. Thank you so much for watching this review, and we will see you all next time.